Pride and Prejudice was written by Jane Austen, a brilliant English author known for her sharp wit and keen observation of human nature. Published in 1813, the novel is set in the quiet English countryside during a time when marriage was not just about love, but also about securing a stable future. The story follows Elizabeth Bennet, a smart and spirited young woman, as she navigates love, family, and society. With its charming characters and unforgettable romance, this novel has captured the hearts of readers for over 200 years. The story begins with the Bennet family, who live modestly in the village of Longbourn. Mr. and Mrs. Bennet have 5 daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. Since women cannot inherit property, the Bennet daughters face uncertainty about their future. Mrs. Bennet is determined to marry off her daughters to wealthy men, even if it means pushing them into unsuitable matches. Mr. Bennet, on the other hand, is more relaxed and enjoys teasing his wife about her single-minded focus on marriage. Excitement fills the village when news arrives that a rich young bachelor, Mr. Bingley, has rented the nearby estate of Netherfield Park. Mrs. Bennet immediately dreams of him marrying one of her daughters. Mr. Bingley attends a local ball where he proves to be kind, cheerful, and easygoing. He quickly takes a liking to Jane, the eldest Bennet daughter, who is beautiful, gentle, and soft-spoken. Everyone notices their instant connection, and it seems like a perfect match. However, Mr. Bingley's friend, Mr. Darcy, is a different story. Mr. Darcy is tall, handsome, and very wealthy, but he comes across as proud and aloof. At the ball, he refuses to dance with Elizabeth, calling her tolerable but not handsome enough to tempt me. Elizabeth overhears this remark and is deeply offended. From that moment, she decides she dislikes Mr. Darcy, finding his arrogance insufferable. As the days go by, Elizabeth meets Mr. Wickham, a charming and handsome soldier stationed in the village. Mr. Wickham seems friendly and open, and Elizabeth enjoys talking to him. He shares a sad story, claiming that Mr. Darcy treated him unfairly by refusing to give him some money that Darcy's late father had promised to help him start his life. Elizabeth believes Wickham's story and feels even more justified in her dislike of Darcy. Meanwhile, Mr. Bingley and Jane continue to grow closer. Jane visits Netherfield but catches a cold and has to stay there for several days. During this time, Elizabeth visits her sister and spends more time around Mr. Darcy, who begins to notice her wit and intelligence. Although he is attracted to her, Darcy struggles with his feelings because he looks down on her family's lower social standing and lack of wealth. Adding to the mix is Mr. Collins, a distant cousin of the Bennet family. Mr. Collins is a clergyman and the heir to the Bennet estate, as women cannot inherit. He visits Longbourn with the intention of marrying one of the Bennet daughters, believing it is his duty to provide for the family. Mr. Collins is awkward, overly formal, and self-important, but he sees himself as a very eligible bachelor. He first proposes to Elizabeth, but she refuses, shocking her mother. Mrs. Bennet cannot understand why Elizabeth would turn down a secure future, but Elizabeth insists she could never marry a man she does not respect or love. Shortly after, Mr. Collins proposes to Elizabeth's friend, Charlotte Lucas, who accepts him out of practicality, not love. Things take a turn when Mr. Bingley suddenly leaves Netherfield and moves back to London, breaking Jane's heart. Elizabeth suspects that Mr. Darcy influenced Bingley to leave, as Darcy does not think Jane is a suitable match for his friend. Elizabeth's resentment toward Darcy deepens, and she begins to see him as the cause of her sister's unhappiness. Later, Elizabeth visits Charlotte at her new home, which happens to be near Mr. Darcy's grand estate, Pemberley. During her visit, Elizabeth and Darcy meet again. One day, completely out of the blue, Darcy confesses his love for Elizabeth and proposes to her. However, his proposal is full of arrogance. He admits he has struggled against his feelings because of her lower status and her family's lack of refinement. Elizabeth is shocked and angry. She rejects him, accusing him of ruining Jane's happiness by separating her from Bingley and of mistreating Mr. Wickham. The next day, Darcy gives Elizabeth a letter to explain himself. In the letter, he admits to influencing Bingley, but claims he thought he was protecting his friend from an unequal match. As for Wickham, Darcy reveals the truth. Wickham is a gambler and a liar who once tried to elope with Darcy's younger sister, Georgiana, to gain access to her fortune. Darcy's honesty surprises Elizabeth, and she begins to question her judgment. For the first time, she considers that she may have been too quick to believe Wickham's story and too harsh in her opinion of Darcy. While Elizabeth is processing these revelations, disaster strikes the Bennet family. Lydia, the youngest Bennet sister, runs away with Mr. Wickham. This scandal threatens to ruin the family's reputation, as living with a man without being married is seen as disgraceful. The Bennets are frantic, especially Mrs. Bennet, who fears the worst. Mr. Bennet goes to search for Lydia, but it is Mr. Darcy who quietly saves the day. Without telling anyone, Darcy tracks down Lydia and Wickham, pays off Wickham's debts, and ensures they marry to protect the Bennet family's honor. He does all this for Elizabeth, even though he has no guarantee of her affection. When Elizabeth learns about Darcy's actions, she is deeply moved. She realizes he is not the proud, selfish man she thought he was, but someone capable of great kindness and selflessness. Her feelings for him begin to change, and she starts to see him in a new light. Meanwhile, Mr. Bingley returns to Netherfield and rekindles his romance with Jane. This time, he proposes to her, and she happily accepts. The Bennet family is overjoyed by Jane's engagement, but Elizabeth is still unsure about her own future with Darcy. When Darcy and Elizabeth meet again, their interactions are warmer and more understanding. Darcy has changed. He is no longer as proud or arrogant. Elizabeth, too, has grown. She is willing to admit her mistakes and see the good in him. Eventually, Darcy proposes again, this time with humility and sincerity. Elizabeth accepts, realizing she loves and respects him. Their union is built on mutual understanding, trust, and personal growth. The story concludes with two happy marriages, Jane and Bingley, and Elizabeth and Darcy. The Bennet family, despite their flaws, finds joy and security. Elizabeth and Darcy's journey from misunderstanding and pride to love and respect is both touching and inspiring. Pride and Prejudice is a thoughtful exploration of human relationships, the power of first impressions, and the importance of personal growth. Through Elizabeth and Darcy's journey, the novel shows that true love can overcome prejudice, social barriers, and even personal flaws.